Welcome. I am Terry Kay of the Jewish Grandparents Network. Thank you for joining us for the joys and oys of multi-faith families. How grandparents can find the blessings and navigating the challenges, led by our dear friend, Ruth Nemzoff. A big thank you to Rosie Powers of Tiny Windows Consulting and Sarah Reed, our JGN colleague, who are helping us facilitate. If you have a question, please write it in the chat box or raise your Zoom hand. We invited you to send us questions in advance, and many of you did, and we thank you for doing that. We have shared these questions with Ruth. We've discussed them in advance, and we will get to as many of them as we can. We will certainly leave time for them at the end. That's it from me. Now may I turn the mic over to my wonderful colleague, JGN's CEO and the co-founder of the Jewish Grandparents Network, together with Lee Hendler, David Raphael, who will introduce Ruth and then interview her.
Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. I am so glad to welcome you, and I hope you're having a good evening. I have the best job of all tonight. I get to interview a dear friend, a wonderful mother and grandmother, and one of the most innovative and engaging people I know. Dr. Ruth Nemzoff is an author, an educator, a Jewish community leader, and a very significant mensch. She's a frequent lecturer, having presented on a broad array of topics in over 350 venues. She has authored 2 really wonderful books with great titles: Don't Bite Your Tongue, How to Foster Rewarding Relationships with Your Adult Children, and Don't Roll Your Eyes, Making In-Laws into Family. She's a resident scholar at the Brandeis Women's Studies Center. Ruth serves on the Jewish Grandparents Network National Advisory Committee and on the boards of directors of Interfaith Family and the Brandeis Women's Study Research Center, and she is the mother of 4 adult children, 4 in-law children, and the grandmother of 11. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Ruth Nemzoff.
Well, hi, everybody. It's my pleasure. I'm going to put it here so I can see you all. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm going to begin by, we just said a couple of thank yous. I'd like to add to that. A thank you to Terry Kay for taking care of all the nuts and bolts of this, and to David for helping me design the design of the program, and to my two of my 5 granddaughters, Anna Sophia and Ellie, because they helped me choose the music that we'll hear at the end about Lean on Me, because the song really describes what this is about. And that is, lean on me when you're strong, because it'll help me carry on, and it'll help you carry on, and I'll need you in the future. So that's what this is about. And we see that these thank yous are very important, because I couldn't be doing this workshop without all these people behind me. And that's what families are about. And so that's our goal. How are we going to work together to really make our families work? So what we're going to do now, I must say, this class is already my absolute favorite class, because I've asked many, many classes to send in questions, and this class really sent in questions, and it was terrific. We'll try to, we can't possibly get to them all. If there's really a big interest to continue on in a class or something, we can talk with David and Terry about that. But now I think we'll just begin, and we're going to begin by, I asked you, and many of you wrote in, some of the joys, and could we have that slide? Some of the joys of having an interfaith family, okay? And I have some quotes here, but I'd like you people, I'm gonna give you just a little minute to add more. What do you think? What have you found some of the joys of having a multi-faith family? And just put your answers in the chat, please. Okay, have we got anyone with the courage to put anything in the chat? I'm not seeing any. Are you?
Not right now, no. So
Okay.
maybe you want to just, if you
So we'll
maybe
begin.
read. Mhm.
So these are some of my favorite quotes from people in various, I've run over 30 sessions during COVID. And these are some of the answers. Hi, Sally says, it gives me a unique, special relationship. Just a minute, let me get it up. It gives me a unique, special relationship with my grandchildren as they get older. That's great. Sally, can you say a little more about that?
Don't forget to unmute yourself when you're ready to speak.
That this is a special niche that you can have with your grandchildren? Okay, well, while she's trying to do that, let me talk about these slides. So these are some of the things that people have said. It forces me to think through how Judaism is especially wonderful. Great. Why is it meaningful to you? And I think many of us have found that. Great. And Sue said that. So many people really love the fact that my kids come to Passover every year. I don't have to fight with the other parents or swap off with the other grandparents. So that's pretty fun. We've learned, many people have learned about other cultures and religions. As Sue said, a lot more reading about Judaism because she wants to answer the questions properly. She wants to learn more. It's taught me many perspectives. And while I knew there were many perspectives, I've grown in understanding. And because my child is in an interfaith marriage, I have to work on the relationship with my in-laws. And this is very interesting because when I wrote my first book, I interviewed a young couple, and he was Chinese and she was an American from the Midwest. And she told me this story. She said, oh, we were so excited. He asked me to marry him. And I said, oh, wait, we'll have to go home and tell my parents. And he said, we'll have to go home and ask my parents. And they both started laughing because they knew they were going to have to work on the relationship. And that, in a way, was wonderful. They felt it was really wonderful because they were aware that nothing happens by magic, that in relationships, you have to work on that. And then we have a chance to show other people that Jews are people too, combating anti-Semitism. Good. David, did you want to ask me anything about that?
Well, there were a couple of, I'd love to see that slide again for a minute, because there are a couple of interesting things that I saw in these answers. One is, people would say, well, I'm in a multi-faith family. I get to learn about another tradition and other cultures, but our participants are saying they also get to learn more about their own Jewish identity and think more about their own Jewish identity. So there is this kind of shared learning opportunity, not just about, I only use this word positively, about the other, but about ourselves as well. And I'd love your thoughts about that, this notion of being in a multi-faith family as a learning opportunity, not just about others, but about ourselves as well.
Yes, well, I thought H. Siegel said in the chat also that he or she also found that in order to answer the questions, he's finding out about more parts of Judaism. And I think we all, many of us do that because we want to answer the questions correctly. And we know that however much knowledge we have about Judaism, it's never enough. And so that, I think, is typical of what folks say.
Do you think when we embrace or learn about other cultures, it kind of elevates who we are, both as Jews, but also people of the world? In other words, it gives us a broader perspective on things and perhaps become more respectful.
Absolutely. I know I have 4 children, all of whom have intermarried. And it makes me read the newspaper about different parts of the world that I really would have, skimmed the headlines and maybe not know more about. And having lived abroad, or many of you who've traveled abroad, you go to learn about the different ways people can do things, and it adds to our creativity.
I want to ask another question, another response I found especially interesting. It's, and I'm trying to think of who was by a woman with somebody with initials SH. She says, it gives me a unique, special relationship with my grandchildren as they get older. It seems to be part of what she's saying is that as grandchildren get older, there is the capacity to engage them in more deeply meaningful conversations. And it's, it's not just, gee, I got a beautiful present for Christmas and Hanukkah. It's about meaning and values. And how do you see, and I know you have grandkids who come from multi-faith families. How do you see that transition as your grandkids get older?
Oh my goodness, it's so wonderful. As I gave you the example of planning for this workshop, I wanted to include them because I want them to know me as a person as well as a grandmother. But as we did it and we chose songs, we talked about family and what's important about family and what matters and why am I concerned about this and why am I doing this? And this gives me a chance to talk to them about my values. And as the kids get older, we get to do that. Right. I did notice one thing on that first slide where we talk about someone mentioned getting the kids every year for Passover. But I want to be clear that many kids come for no holidays. So while that's a lovely joke that you get to have the kids for your holiday, some of us don't, because we know that the biggest interfaith marriage is between the faith and the faithless. And that doesn't mean belief in God. It means whether you want to do any religious practices.
Any more questions or thoughts about this particular topic of some of the joys or some of the real values or learnings that come with the multi-faith families? If folks want to either raise their hands or put their questions, thoughts in the chat box, that'd be great. Jane, I always respond to Jane, I say.
One of the Janes. It gives me great pleasure to know that my grandchildren from an interfaith family can choose the values from both faith traditions. That there's a certain, if they care to, there's a certain moral gravity because they have two traditions in their family. And, I had this experience where my grandson, whose mother is not Jewish, asked me to take him to Israel. Of course, I took him, but I had no idea that this was of such importance to him. And I want him to have the values that both traditions share. And the rest is up to, I don't know, it's up to what happens. And the values are most important to me. And our faith traditions have wonderful values.
Wonderful. Sally, you have a question or thought you'd like to share, please?
So I had written it before, but Ruth pinned it for me when she said, there's kind of two kinds in my mind of interfaith families. Ones who want to bring both religions or cultures out, and others who want everything gone. And my grandchildren are teeny tiny now; they're still rugrats. So I'm not in a conversation place yet. But the children, that's the grown-ups, the parents, push back on anything that I do. So I have to be careful if I want those relationships. And they're holding tight to this idea that I am not to talk about anything and no one will talk about anything. And because they say they want to give them a choice. And I said, you only have a choice to reject something that you know. That's why I sent you to Hebrew school, not to adopt a set of beliefs, but rather to challenge your own beliefs. And if you don't give that to your children, they'll never be able to choose. And that's going to be my struggle. She's not going to be able to avoid it at all. Her sister's a rabbi, so she can't get out of this altogether. But it's a problem for a grandmother to want to share that. So I whisper the Shema when I put them to bed.
But I might say you've begun the discussion. You've begun You're right. And that's where it begins. And you have many, many years and many, many changes in you, in the kids. By the kids, I mean the parents and the tinies, the grandchildren. So it's not a conversation at one point in life. It's a conversation over the life course.
So I try very hard not to shut that conversation down with my own issues and to say, I've got to let this open and I have to let this flow or I'm going to lose a child.
Mm-hmm. And we know that one of the things that bonds families is sharing good times together. And those good times can be going for a walk in the park. It can be Shabbat. It can be, Christmas. And maybe the more wonderful times you share together, the closer it will become. And I think they begin to trust that you're not trying to convert their kids just because you're trying to share.
I think we'll take maybe one more question and move on to the next. Terry, does that make sense? Or okay.
Yep. Pearl has they've raised their hand. Pearl.
Yes.
And her
Hi. Thank
partner.
you. I have granddaughters who both kids. My daughter was raised very culturally and religiously Jewishly, in a conservative kind of background. And she and her husband, he's Catholic. They both reject everything. And they want no part of it, although they both go to their families and do Christmas and Hanukkah. And because that is the clearest and easiest. So my 6-year-old granddaughter is starting to ask a little bit of questions, which I'm very gratified. One day while she was on FaceTime with me, because they live in San Diego, she said something about God. And Adina said, my daughter said to her, what is, do you know what God is? She said, sure, I know what God is. He's that man in the sky. So she'd already heard something from her classmates, her friends, and it gave us an opportunity to talk about it just a little. But I am walking on eggs because they'll let us do a little bit when they're with us, but it's clearly, it's a big challenge, like the previous person who spoke, not to push more than will be allowed. And any clues about that would be very helpful for me.
Well, one clue I would say is, again, building trust is enormously important. And if they know that you will answer the question and you will tell them, your grandchild's name?
Hannah.
Okay. If you say to them, Hannah asked me today what God was. I told her this is what I think God is, but I told her to talk with her mommy. Maybe she has a different idea, and that many people have different ideas. So in other words, you're honest, they know they can trust you, and they know you'll tell them.
So that relationship is between me, my husband, and my granddaughters, not so much between me and my daughter, because the grandchildren might trust us, but the children are afraid we're going to put our
right.
Put
but
forth our point of view.
I am suggesting that you say to your daughter what you said to your granddaughter. I don't want any secrets. I want you to know what I said. I want you to know that I encouraged her to talk to you. I want you. So there you're beginning that conversation with your daughter.
I see. Well, I let pretty much that happen. I was very fascinated to hear it begin.
Right. And it begins.
So I know we have a number of questions, and Melanie has raised her hand. And I'd like somebody, this is like walking on eggshells. What a good name for a book. When you allow yourself to think about it. I think the next part of our conversation is to talk about, we're not going to really call them woe or always, we're going to call them challenges. So unless your kind of thinking or your question, Melanie, has to do specifically with some of the joys that you've experienced, perhaps we can move on to the next slide and talk about some of the challenges, because we've already identified a couple. One is, and there was a wonderful quote in the box talking about dealing with we're really kind of overmatched when it comes Jewishly, in terms of the culture that surrounds our kid, knowing when to say, when to talk and when not to talk. But here's some of the oys or some of the challenges that emerge. And so Marsha was talking about walking on eggshells. But here's some of the things that you wrote in advance.
Well, these are some of the quotes I took from other
Right.
people.
Right.
My children, that I worry that my children won't know my heritage. I feel like a failure, that somehow I was taught by my parents, or this person was, that I would be breaking the chain. And I want to say to you, you are not breaking the chain. Judaism has been changing for years, and we can still continue to change and morph and still have an influence. The rabbis stunned the kids by being unwilling to marry them, and now they won't go near a synagogue. That still continues to be a problem, particularly in the conservative movement. We might want to think about where we send our children to talk to a rabbi. Is it a rabbi who will be open and welcoming? My son's engaged. I wish someone would wish me a mazel tov instead of asking if she's Jewish. It's up to each one of us in the community to welcome people. And how do I teach my grandchild what's meaningful to me? You use every opportunity. And I'm fascinated by this whole notion of we're walking on eggshells. Because if you remember when you were first married or first coupled, how many things did you walk on eggshells about? I mean, we're pros at walking on eggshells. That's what we do in relationships. We figure out who can we trust and at what point. And then I'm sorry, what was the last thing on that slide, that last slide?
Please leave the slide up for a minute if we can get it back.
But
okay, we'll figure it out.
Okay, but
sorry about that. I had asked
Okay.
Rosie to take it down. I thought you were done. My apologies.
Again, this notion of we had been taught that we are betraying the Jewish people. And yet, in fact, it's a tremendous opportunity for the Jewish people because we're bringing more people to understand us. And this relates to the question I believe Melanie put in the chat about anti-Semitism. You know, we've grown up knowing about anti-Semitism. And when people marry into the Jewish people, I know every time there's a shooting, I get a call from at least two of my friends who call and say, you know how I love Josh. He's so wonderful. I love that my grandkids are being brought up Jewish, but I didn't sign on for this kind of hatred, this kind of danger. And so one of the roles we get, and we are lucky to have, is to really begin to educate the people in our greater families about Judaism, what it is and what it's not. So to me, that's one of the oys, because it is very scary for people marrying into our group, but it also gives us an opportunity.
Go ahead. I was going to say that the questions on the screen, to a certain extent, speak of like two different elements of being judged. One is we're self-judging because we all grew up in an era where marrying somebody not Jewish was considered a failure in terms of Jewish life. That's how, it was, that's how we grew up, but also being judged from the outside within our Jewish community, because people, the first thing they ask me is if it's Jewish, because that's immediately making a judgment. And if you say no, that person perhaps is perceiving you as a failure Jewishly. So part of what you're telling us, Ruth, is, hey, we got to move beyond that, because it's just in these days, it's just not functional.
Right. Exactly. Not only is it not functional, it's missing an opportunity. It's missing an opportunity to welcome others into our community. It's missing an opportunity to teach our grandchildren, and it's missing an opportunity to talk with our in-laws. Now, I thought there was a very interesting comment in the chat about, I feel uncomfortable with my Christian in-laws. I don't know what to say. And I would say, just show some curiosity. Show some curiosity about their religion, and maybe they'll show some curiosity about ours. And also just asking what their hopes for their grandchildren are. And the biggest thing is the way you make friends with anyone is by finding a commonality. I think I often tell this story about how I wrote a an article with my 4th grade grandson. And he wanted to write about finances. And I said, I didn't think either of us knew enough about finances, but there is a subject he knew about that older people need to know about. And that was how to make friends, because he had just moved from another town. And I asked him how he made a friend. He said, well, you know, I was standing in line and a kid dropped a jacket and I said, here's your jacket. And that was the beginning of a conversation. So if we look back on our lives, how do we make friends with people? We focus on the commonalities, and sometimes that's easy. So for example, my in-laws are, my kids' in-laws, my Machatonim, are from all around the world. But in terms of values, they are absolutely identical to us in terms of wanting a close family, in terms of emphasis on education. So you may find that the only thing you have in common is you both like the same music, or you both like motorcycles, or it doesn't matter what you like. It's anything. It's one thing at a time. Okay, I'm going to look here at some more of the questions in the chat.
Ruth, I was going to ask if Rosie could take down the slide. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to quote from a wonderful article by one of the members of our National Advisory Council, who's also on the call. It's Reverend Roger Talbot, who's an extraordinary gentleman. And he wrote an essay about welcoming people into our family in terms of our multi-faith family. And one of the things he said is our two religions do not have to be barriers. When we give each other room to be ourselves, profound meetings can happen. I love another quote he said is, and I love this one as well, is make room for each other. And let me see, no, that's not it. So it is, our two religions do not have to be barriers. When we give each other room to be ourselves, profound meetings can happen. What do you think that means to give each other room to be ourselves?
Well, I think the answer to that is also to answer to the question by Sally about how do you invite the kids to Passover without saying you're going to convert them, and maybe say to them, you know, Passover is the second most celebrated holiday in America. And there's the Jewish Indian Passover, there's the Jewish American Passover, there's the Jewish Black Passover, there's the Jewish Irish Passover, you name it, there's a Passover Seder. Because the story, the urge for freedom, the yearning for freedom is a universal yearning. And so when you invite them, you could say, you know, and I'd love it if there was something that particularly you wanted to say about the topic, either of freedom or of a poem or something you would like to include in it. And certainly you could do that with your in-laws too. So for me, making welcoming is talking about the universals. So as you know, you can tell every story in many ways. And one way you can tell the Passover story is that a story of freedom. I mean, that is the story of people. It's not just a story of peoplehood. It's a story of, you know, making choices that help you keep free, be free. So to me, what home is, making another person welcome in your home, is that they can ask you questions and they can tell you when you're annoying them.
There's a wonderful quote by Barbara Colodny, who wrote, I guess a quote from Leah Palmer, intimidating is the correct word. It isn't it a terrible feeling? Barbara, do you want to talk about that a little bit, about this notion of feeling either intimidated or concerns about being intimidating?
Well, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. You try to do everything. How do I put this? And you understand, it doesn't matter how old you are. You're trying to be a good girl, and you were brought up a certain way. And it's so in my heart, so ingrained in me as far back as I can remember, I had a personal relationship with God, and was very lucky that my girls went to Jewish day school part of the, till 8th grade. And really, I had a great experience there because it was so warm and welcoming, even though it was modern Orthodox. They never had an attitude about anything. It was always do the best you can, and maybe you'll do a little more next week, next month, or next year. And that was smart because it drew people in instead of intimidating them. And I think, when you feel so strongly, you want to convey that. And I still do to my 3-year-old grandson, and the baby's just turned 1. But the first time I met her, I very softly sang the Shema to her, and I did the same thing to my little grandson. And the little sweet smile that came on their faces, to this day, when I always say, did you sing your Shema when they wake up? Well, more the 3-year-old. And he starts singing it, and he has the ch so well when he talks about challah. And and their souls are Jewish. And my daughter would be much more compliant if I think her husband was more compliant. He was raised Catholic. So I try to show him to explain the Tehillim, the Psalms, because Christians read the Psalms just like Jews do. And I've been in a Tehillim group for 20 some years that I've Zoomed before we even knew what Zoom was, because I moved from where I used to live in Baltimore and moved to Cape May, New Jersey. And I don't miss that class the Cantor's wife gives every Thursday. I don't miss it. I talk about it. It's part of my fabric. It's very comforting. And I try to teach that little by little, just little things about Judaism.
Right. So
but I feel like I do it cautiously, and that's a terrible feeling.
yeah, but I think you're saying something important, and maybe Ruth responds to it as well. We like to say in the Jewish Grandparents Network that we can't expect our grandchildren to be on Jewish journeys if we're not on our own. That part of what makes us authentic is our engagement in Jewish life of our own, and committing to whether it's learning or practicing Jewish things, and modeling those behaviors, not necessarily showing them off, but modeling them, but also demonstrating there's an authenticity because this is something we believe in. Ruth, you want to respond to that a little bit?
I just want to say that I think we always want to do, we don't want to go behind the parents' back, that's for sure. That right. We really want to share with them what we are doing and why. I love the idea if he is into the Psalms because you're in the Psalms, what a wonderful way to share that. So it isn't, if there's a recipe, it's to the readiness. It's okay for you to share what you do in your life, right? I enjoy reading Psalms, many people do, right? And
lighting Shabbos candles is something right. He loves to do at my house.
Well, that's a wonderful thing then.
Oh,
so you work with what you work on the beginnings, and maybe it'll grow and maybe it won't. I do want to say that there was a question in here which I thought we could answer right, is exactly what we're talking about right now, where someone says, you wonder if it's important for kids to talk about it before they get married. It's great if they do. Look at all the things don't you wish you talked about, like how you like the toothpaste cap, how you like to load the dishwasher. I mean, how many things don't we wish we talked about beforehand? But, we have to deal with the deck we've got. This is what we have. They're talking about it now. That's wonderful. So I think it's important. Now, we may want to send our kids, for example, we would love it if we could be less intimidating. So how do you be less intimidating? Number one, always translate. Never assume anyone knows, the vocabulary. Number two, asking for their opinion. What's like in your tradition? What do you know about this? So that would be another way. But I do love the thought that someone suggested in the chat, and I apologize, I forget the name, but the one of inviting other Christian people to the Seder, so that your relative is not the only Christian at the Seder, or a person of another faith other than that. So just little things, the same kind of things you do in your life generally. You have a new friend coming to town, you invite over someone they might like, right? It's as simple as that.
I'm going to ask one last question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Terry, who has some questions that she, and it's related to Martha's. I think I understand what she's saying is that, that sometimes Jews are told by Christians that they won't go to heaven if they don't accept Jesus.
Right.
When do you draw the line and say, I want to be welcoming, but let me tell you what's important to me, or and how do you do that in a way that's menschlich?
I think you say it straight out. Some people believe that. Different peoples believe different things. The Russians think that the Ukrainians are terrible. The Ukrainians think the Russians are terrible. This is the way of the world. But on this particular one, I have to think they're wrong, because I don't believe, maybe you don't believe in heaven and hell, or maybe you don't believe that just because what you believe sends you in one up or down, or fire or brimstone or wherever. And just be honest about it.
Do you ever find yourself saying, my house, my rules?
Very rarely, because I'm pretty flexible. I find it interesting. I don't like rules myself, so I think I'm perhaps not the best person to do this, answer this, but I'd welcome an answer from someone else.
I want to give that a minute and then turn it over. Terry, I'm going to turn
I
this
might do it in terms of eating in the living room. I do have that or clearing up after the table.
Well, we had an incident where somebody wanted to bring unkosher food into our house.
Right.
And we said, this is what we do, and not in your house, it's fine, but in our house, this is what we believe.
Right, exactly. And I think we can be honest about that. Just say that honestly. It's a Jewish custom. It's a custom we believe in. We keep it because we like the tradition, because my parents did. Whatever reason you keep kosher, wonderful time to have a discussion and say, but I'd love the apple pie, but I just can't bring it into the house. But it's so nice of you to think.
That's right. We don't do lard.
Right.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to jump in. Thank you, David and Ruth, because we'd like to get as many of our participant questions to you as possible, Ruth. I'm not going to mention names because several people asked that it remain anonymous. How much should we do in acknowledging the other faith for the grandchildren, or should we just honor and celebrate our own faith?
Well, this is really tricky. And I would say that certainly you do need to, at least if you want your faith to be respected, you have to respect the others. So I would say certainly you can't lie to their children. They are both of these traditions. And it's much easier, for example, if you're from a family that comes from another country, because you can always say to the other grandparents, I'd really love you to teach the kids whatever language you speak. I want them to know that they are Chinese or Italian or whatever. And it would be wonderful if you could teach that. So sometimes you can ask them to teach the culture if your children are being brought up Jewish, but ask them to teach about their culture as opposed to their religion, and invite them to share their stories, because they do need to know that they are products of two sides. And maybe more, maybe 4, maybe 10.
Thank you.
By the way, anyone is welcome to disagree or argue, because it definitely depends on the situation. But I do think that there's a lot to be learned from other cultures. And
Right, so we invite controversy here. You can unmute yourself and just speak if you disagree with Ruth, or
So-
if you agree.
Hi, this is Deborah, and I'm one of the people who asked that question. And it was more, first of all, I have one grandbaby and he's only 10 months old, so I have a lot of time. But it was more in the context of, so we happened to be with our kids during Passover, and then it was Easter Sunday. And what I was thinking was, in the future, do I acknowledge that it's Easter? And if I'm with them, do I bring Easter egg candy? Or do I allow the other family to provide that background and culture? That was more the question, not, you know, I just didn't know what I should do to acknowledge it or not acknowledge it. So I wished my daughter-in-law a happy Easter. She had some family members there and we all got together Easter Sunday morning. But, you know, I was projecting into the future saying, if I was, you know, being the Jewish grandparents, if we were with our kids and it happened to be Easter Sunday and the baby was, you know, walking, talking, and his other grandparents weren't there, should I do something Easter-ish for them, or should I just stay in my own box?
ask your daughter-in-law.
Okay.
I mean, you know, this is a great family discussion. This is an opportunity. You know, I want to honor you. I feel a little uncomfortable. I only like kosher chocolate. I know that what's the famous chocolate for Passover? Well, whatever the company is, I think they make chocolate eggs. You know, I'd be happy to do some chocolate eggs, possibly. I mean, there are just a million things that you can compromise on. It's not a yes or a no.
Again, he was only, you know, at that point, he was only 6 months old.
Sure, I understand, but you're thinking about the future.
But, you know, I acknowledged to my daughter-in-law, you know, happy Easter and her cousins. But then I thought, well, in the future, if I was the only grandparent here, do I do something for Easter, even though it's not my holiday? Or do the kids do something for Easter? And, you know, and if we happen to be there, we join in with them, but I didn't know if I should like take that step forward and say, oh, let's do this for Easter when it's not my holiday.
I don't think you have to. You could decide with your family, but I'd also say, what would you do if a friend was coming from abroad
Right.
to your house? What would you do for them on Easter?
Yep.
That might be the answer too.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you so much. Ruth, we got several questions to do with the in-laws.
Yes.
The machatonim. In South
Yes.
Africa, we say the machatonim. How
Right.
do I build a relationship with the machatonim, the other in-laws, when we have entirely different backgrounds?
Piece by piece, step by step, little teeny sharings. One of the wonderful things about a wedding is you're sharing the wedding. You're sharing a good time. You're sharing a traumatic moment. You're sharing a wonderful moment. But it's definitely a moment, right, that you are sharing when your children marry. Maybe you begin talking about that. What was it like for you? What did you feel as the kids went down the aisle? You know, were you cheerful? Were you joyful? Were you feeling like a job well done? You know, maybe talk about some of your emotions. Friendships are made bit by sharing good times together, by sharing neutral times together, by sharing a meal together. I know that with my own in-laws, the first set of in-laws, we met them at the wedding and we decided we'd go to a museum because they could teach us about their culture by going to a museum. And that was the beginning of really talking. They saw we wanted to know about them, and they in turn came back with they wanted to know about us. And that was the beginning of a relationship. And I would say, remember, we need each other in the beginning of life and the end of life and all the crises in between. In my second book, I had the in-law book, I tell the story of two mothers-in-laws who truly disliked each other. They took an instant dislike to each other. Well, the twins were born. The mother's stuck in the hospital with some sort of infection. And these two mothers are in an apartment with one bedroom, and they have to feed those twins round the clock together. And you know what? It didn't matter whether they liked each other. They just worked together. And I think, again, if you look at what you do in your work life, in your volunteer life, we've all worked with people we don't like. But the point is to work together, to become a team, get the job done, get those babies fed 24/7. And of course, we know that's only one crisis in life. There are a million more that are going to happen.
Right. Ruth, thank you so much. The next question is really about the issue of multi-faith and religion and end of life. It's a little long, the question, so I hope that you all will bear with me. I think it's important and quite beautiful. Our family consists of Christian grandparents, my wife and me, says the question, the person who sent the question, a Jewish son and rabbi daughter-in-law and 2 grandchildren, a spiritual but not religious son, a daughter-in-law and 2 grandchildren. A year ago, our spiritual but not religious son died of pancreatic cancer. He and his family did not want a funeral. Any communal ritual felt intrusive and performative to them. We have loved, celebrated, learned, grown, and grieved from the differences and commonalities that we have in our interfaith family. And the person ends with, I sincerely hope that the next funeral will be mine, and feel a responsibility to lead a conversation about what my wife's son and grandchildren will need when that time comes. Any suggestions for how to do that?
Oh, I love that. I think that is something we absolutely need to do, is talk about what we would like. Because remember, a funeral both comforts the living and honors the dead. So one thing you're saying is, this is the way I want to be honored. Excuse me. My husband has recently died, so this is just a very interesting topic to me. And it was so wonderful to have a clear message on what he wanted. It made the decision so easy. But it wasn't just about the ceremony and the funeral and the shiva. It was also about how he wanted to be remembered in the daily lives of the various children and grandchildren. So I like that. I think you can just talk about it. Now, often kids don't want to talk about it. You're going to live forever. Well, you know, the stats on that are pretty definite. We're not going to live forever. So clearly we can and should talk about that, but it's also for the living. And so the living and different children will feel differently. Some will want 7 days of Shiva and some not. Some don't want any Shiva. And by the way, I love the fact that this Jewish Grandparent Network has grandparents who may not have been brought up Jewish and may not be Jewish at all, but are walking the way with us. And how wonderful is that, and how much they deserve to be honored. So I think talking about death is really tough for people. We don't want to face it, but you know, it's going to happen to us all. So I would urge you to just bring up the conversation and say, I know it's tough. I know you don't want to hear this, but I want to make my wishes clear. That's what I would do. As someone who's just experienced it, it was just so wonderful to have those decisions made by him.
So the person who sent in the question is Christian himself.
Right. Yes, and I would certainly, as a Jew, honor his wishes. As a Jewish in-law, I would want to honor that family because they are my relatives. They brought up the father of my grandchildren. You know, and I would want to. I think we should honor what that other person wants. If we feel we need a shiver afterwards because we're very close to this person, we can invite a few friends over or whatever we want to do. But I would say, why can't we observe someone else's customs if it would honor that person?
Thank you.
Now,
Marlene,
by the way, I want to say not everyone agrees with me in any of these answers because there's no recipe.
Marlene, did you want to speak to the subject? If you could unmute.
Yeah, no, I was gonna talk about my 5-year-old grandson that told me he's like in love with Christmas. and
A lot of us are.
and he told me this weekend, he told me he keeps like pestering me about celebrating Christmas. Why don't you celebrate Christmas? And I'm like, because I don't want to go to church. A lot of people go to church on Christmas and I don't want to go to church. Well, we don't go to church on Christmas. You don't have to go to church. And he's like really pushing me to celebrate. I think he wants more presents. I don't know.
Would you like to respond? Or did you have was there a question? I'm sorry, I got
guess
distracted.
after listening to this conversation, I'm thinking that I guess I have to like go along with his Christmas wish to
Well,
keep the,
you can
Yeah.
both go along with it and tell him why you don't celebrate Christmas.
I gave him Hanukkah presents. I give him Hanukkah presents. We celebrate Hanukkah, but he wants me to celebrate both.
And you can say, I'm happy to celebrate it with you or see you celebrate it, but I feel strongly that it's not my holiday, it's someone else's holiday. You could say that, or you could say, you know, these are the reasons I don't celebrate Christmas, because it's not what I believe. You can be honest. Children can take a lot of honesty. By the way, there was one question in the chat that I think is a really interesting question. Should we send Christmas cards and so forth? You know, Nowruz or you know, Pongal or whatever the holiday is of another group. And my answer is, would you do it for a friend? Of course you send cards. Politeness is always a great fallback.
Yes, Ruth, and to all our friends, I want to just give a time check. We're at 7:54. I've asked Ruth in advance if she would be willing to stay until 8:15, and Ruth has said yes. Kindly, thank you. And I also know that many of you have to leave at 8 o'clock because that was our commitment to you. So if you want to leave at 8, please go ahead, and thank you so much for joining us. We will follow up tomorrow with the slides and with a transcript of the chat and with the recording and so on. And for everyone who would like to stay till 8:15, we would welcome it.
I would just like to end with the notion that you want your
We're not
relationship-
ending. We're not ending.
Oh, okay. Okay.
We're
Well,
not
I just
ending. We've
want
got
to
another
say
20
this point,
minutes.
that you want your relationships to be authentic. And if you are not authentic yourself and you don't know how to express it yourself, then you can't be authentic with others. And that's with your little grandchildren, your big grandchildren, your kids. So you all know that about relationships.
Ruth, the next question from one of our participants says, we are secular Jews, but we want our grandson to be circumcised. Our son-in-law is from another culture, is not circumcised, and thinks the whole idea is barbaric. His family agrees.
Right.
What do we do?
Well, this is a really, really tough one. I would say there are a whole bunch of new coming of age ceremonies, not coming of age, you know, welcoming birth ceremonies that are being introduced into the Jewish community. Those of you who really feel strongly about circumcision, but you might begin by just explaining why you feel strongly, because it, as one young man said, this was one of my very early interfaith family discussions. One young man said, "Don't you ever tease me about my hunting and fishing again after what you want to do to my sons." So it is looked at as, you know, it's a pretty strange custom to many people. So I think explaining that, I would certainly give in any welcoming ceremony, in any ceremony, give the other grandparents a role. And it may be, as we did, we gave Chinese names. We asked the grandparents to give a Chinese name. as we gave the Hebrew name. And that was really very moving. And the interesting thing is we picked the exact same name in different translation, of course. You can ask them to say a special prayer. You can do whatever you want, but include them, because this is their grandchild too. And you want them to be included in this, I think, and just as you would like to be included. And I think one of the hardest things for Jews, at least from countries where Christian persecution was the major issue, is if your child is christened. It's extremely difficult for us. And I think we have to realize, we have to thank the in-laws if they allow this. We have to realize this is a big thing for people from non-circumcising societies. And it's a really hard one, but it can be resolved. And I will say that really honoring the other grandparents is part of the way to do it, however you decide to do that.
You know, when you spoke about christening, we in the Jewish Grandparents Network Facebook group, and I'm actually just going to put it into chat for those of you who do not belong, the most engagement we have ever had in a post was when a Facebook member posted this adorable little picture of her grandchild wearing a bib that said matzah baby or something, and said, my grandson is going to be baptized soon. How do I stop myself from crying? And she got hundreds of responses. It touched a nerve. It really just touched the heart, pulled at the heartstrings. And she went. You know, people said, don't go. Others said, go to the baptism. She went, and she said she got through it and it was fine.
Right. And, you know, if our children have made that choice, we still can tell them about our values. We can still teach them about our culture, but they will be brought up in another religion. But that doesn't mean, as I was recently at a dinner party and some man came up to me and said, oh, Ruth Nemzoff, oh my God, I've been quoting you for years. No one quotes me for years, right? And what did he quote me on? I said they should know at least as much about Judaism as they learn in school about the American Indian. Now, that what I mean is, you know, knowing about another culture, knowing about Judaism is not an infectious disease any more than knowing about Christmas is an infectious disease.
So a related question is, our grandson will not become a bar mitzvah. He has no interest and the parents are not willing to insist. We feel it is so important. What can we say to our kids?
Well, the first thing is to find out why he doesn't want a bar mitzvah. Is he afraid of failure? He doesn't want a party. We can have a bar mitzvah without a party. Is he afraid of the task? He doesn't want to study. What is the reason that he doesn't want a bar mitzvah? Because you deal with it very differently each way. Another question would be, what would he be willing to do in lieu of a bar mitzvah? If you have the affluence, you could go to Israel. If you don't have the affluence, you could maybe do a tour de shuls in your, you know, of synagogues in your city. You know, there are many ways that you could celebrate this by teaching him about the Jewish culture.
Okay.
But it would begin with a discussion of why he doesn't want the bar mitzvah, because that makes a big difference.
Thank you, Ruth. I think we'll just have maybe one or two more questions that were sent, and then we'll see if our group, our participants, have anything they'd like to add, or maybe you can go to chat, Ruth. My son married a non-practicing Christian who is wonderful. They plan on celebrating all the holidays. I don't think they plan on any religious schooling. I've kept my mouth shut, but truly believe something is better than nothing, even if they choose Christianity. Should I remain silent?
Depending again on the relationship. I mean, you know, this is not the first time you've had a tough situation with your kids, right? And look back on all the tough times you've had, really tough conversations you've had, whether it was drinking, drugs, taking the car, curfews, who knows what worked? What got you making a good discussion? What got you finally talking about it? And try some of those techniques to at least talk about it. Because again, it's not a relationship if you can't talk with each other. And by the way, talking doesn't always have to be with words. As we said, you know, you can send cards, you can send stories, you can send articles, you can talk about a movie you saw or something that troubles you.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm going to end with a broader question, then turn it back to David Raphael, to David to see if you want to go to chats or to close out for the evening. This question is, I'm concerned that our heritage will be lost at some point and feel distressed about it. What can I do to keep Judaism alive in the future generations?
You're asking me? I bet everyone here has one idea on how you can do that.
So let's hear it. Put it in chat. We'd love it.
Yeah, just obviously our own studying and talking about it. Okay, what are some of the wonderful ideas people come up with here? Oh, come on.
So again, the question was, I'm concerned that our heritage.
Right. Lifelong learning, find a study group, study Talmud. Here's somebody, Sally works at a temple to teach people how to make a Jewish home. And there's a lot of that. Talking about our own values is another way. Great. These are all good answers. Talking about our stories, talking about, I know that I always, every Rosh Hashanah or every time my kids get a new pair of shoes, I say, oh yeah, I used to get a new pair of shoes on Rosh Hashanah. And then they have to ask, what's Rosh Hashanah? Right? Well, actually they all know, but I've made sure they know. But everything is an opportunity to open a conversation. Okay, and Karen Orland says, celebrate the holidays. And if they don't celebrate it in their home, that's fine. They can celebrate it in your home. So at least they know what's happening. They know, they feel comfortable. They know what it's like. Invite them to do things. My daughter-in-law grew up with different traditions than we did. We even share with her and her parents. Okay, so that's the other point is, let's not fantasize if you married the little girl or the little boy next door, that everything would be easygoing, that everything would be perfect, and you'd completely agree. Many of these issues are issues that everyone has, only more so. And so we can just get rid of that fantasy. Any of you who've been married more than the honeymoon know that it isn't all just a fantasy. Any more? Oh, food packages, yes. And food can be one of the food, art, music, dance. There are just so many ways to share your culture and begin with anything that is fun. Okay. Books somebody shares. Okay. See, singing Jewish songs that are related to the holiday, but even just singing Jewish song. I bring a braided challah. The little ones brush the egg on top. We bake it in the oven. Again, cooking. Okay. I send food packages. Somebody earlier said something about doing arts and crafts projects. Folks, it's only our imaginations which would limit us the ways we can connect with our kids and our grandkids.
Well, I'm going to take a moment to wrap up. First, I want to thank Ruth. I think it's worth mentioning, by the way, that there are two grandparents mentioned in the Bible, and both of them come from or represent multi-faith families. One of them is Jacob, whose son Joseph married an Egyptian woman, and the other one is Ruth, who did not come from a Jewish background and whose daughter-in-law married Boaz, and their grandson and Ruth's great-grandson was King David among the early leaders of our people. So I think what we're learning is that there are great opportunities in thinking, moving away from the zero-sum game that used to be our way of thinking about multi-faith families. It is something that the Jewish Grandparents Network thinks a lot because it is at this point the norm of our families rather than the minority. The majority of grandparents report that at least one of their grandkids is being raised in a multi-faith families. That doesn't make it any less complicated, but it also provides us wonderful new opportunities. And so what I'd ask you is to let us know your thinking about it and the kind of things that would be helpful for you and the ways that you could help us. Keep your eye out for upcoming programs. Terry and I are not hard to find. One is Terry at jewishgrandparentsnetwork.org, and the other is David at jewishgrandparentsnetwork.org. And we'd love to hear your feedback and your ideas. We have a person who raised their hand. I guess we could take one more question from Jean, and then I think we can finish for the night. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. It's
Jean,
not
you
really
get
a
the last word.
question.
Okay.
It's not really a question. It's just a comment. My feeling has always been, and I'm wonderful friends with, there's just another grandmother and we're very good friends, but I don't think it's a matter of negotiating between grandparents. I always default to going to my son and daughter-in-law and saying, what do you want? This is what I would do, but what do you want? And my daughter-in-law in particular is always very grateful for that. So I try and support, it's their house, their children. I just try and support what they want to do.
Great.
And I think that's a terrific strategy.
Works for me.
I think we should end with the Aretha Franklin song, Respect, but I think we have another one. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And again, we look forward to your thoughts, your feedback, questions, and ideas.
Just remember,
tomorrow we will send you a follow-up email with the recording, a transcript of the chat, Ruth's slides, how to contact Ruth, a survey to fill out. So just look for it tomorrow morning. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here.
and some readings. I've sent 3 articles for those who like to read.
And some readings, part of the slides, Ruth's slides, exactly.
Not required.
And Ruth is asking you to listen to the closing song. So Rosie, you can load the closing song because her granddaughter chose it. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Thank you for being with us.